Okay, the University of Louisville has sounded the alarm. Is anybody going to pay attention? Back in March of this year, which is just coming to my attention now, the president of the University of Louisville, the athletic director, and the chair of the Board of Trustees came together and they penned an article indicating that college athletics was running out of time and asked for all of college athletics to come together to help solve the problem. First, I'm Janine Anthony Bowen. Over the years, I have served on more than seven boards in higher education, have overseen the hiring of 4 executives in higher education, and in governance roles have overseen the investment of more than $2 billion in endowment assets. From a governance perspective, I know higher ed. Let's get into it. So let's talk about the facts of the Louisville situation and what the article set forth. First, Louisville participates in 23 sports. 96% of their student athletes graduate. Most recently, their women's swim team finished in 7th place in the swim natty and had a GPA of 3.62 overall. The baseball team, which regularly competes in the College World Series, including most recently, has a GPA of 3.55. Okay. Now, over 3 years, and they constantly refer to these 3 years in this article, Louisville has seen $3.84 billion in economic impact for the region. This includes direct spending. Secondary effects are tied to events, staffing, visitors, external revenue. And that results in jobs, businesses, and sustained economic activity. And so from their perspective, the University of Louisville is critically important to the region. Now, also in that same 3 years, athletics delivered over $2.3 billion in brand exposure through national broadcasts, streaming platforms, social media, radio, and print coverage. And so that exposure elevates Louisville's brand and supports student recruitment, enrollment, philanthropy, partnerships, and institutional reputation. I think we can extrapolate from this particular use case with Louisville and say that generally that is the case. Okay? Now, across game days in those 3 years, with respect to game days, championships, camps, and hosted events, $720 million in direct economic activity. As a matter of fact, they reported in fiscal year 25, every dollar in financial aid invested in student athletes returned $2.50 roughly in economic value. So for Louisville, athletics isn't simply a competitive enterprise, it's a strategic asset for the university. Now, on the flip side, athletics has a budget of $164 million against revenue of $155 million. And I'm speaking in rough numbers. It's a $12.5 million deficit. And they indicate that the gap widens when they add in potentially $20.5 million in direct payment obligations to athletes. And so to bridge that shortfall, they've applied a $12 million university institutional subsidy to athletics. They've embarked on a $200 per student athletic fee. They've tapped into a $25 million line of credit, and their $34 million reserve is now at $3.4 million. And they are stating that this is not mismanagement on their part, it's a structural problem. And Louisville isn't the exception, it's the rule. And so they go on to provide a few other institutions, some stats around some of these other institutions. For example, Ohio State, $37.7 million deficit on revenue of $255 million. Rutgers, which we've heard about, roughly $500 million in losses since they joined the Big Ten in 2014, and their current spend rate is estimated to be $200 million before any rev share payments are made. And Texas, University of Texas, $379 376 million in operating expenses with debt of 192 million. Okay? And so here's a quote from them. We do not disagree that student athletes deserve to share in the value they create. But the uncomfortable reality is that as currently structured, these changes benefit a small number of athletes in a handful of sports while placing enormous pressure on everyone else. Now, does that sound true to you or not? Here's some more stats from Louisville. Of those 23 sports, 14 are women's sports, 9 are men's sports. Of the 23, only 2 are in the black, football and men's basketball. And those 2 sports are the economic engine for every other sport. So they subsidize every other program. This is not unique to Louisville, okay? So they have suggested that to maximize revenue, they have to remain competitive. Now, when I say revenue, I believe they're talking about revenue across the institution and the ecosystem at large, okay? But to maximize revenue, we must remain competitive. This is what they said in football and men's basketball. And this, from their perspective, necessitates escalated spending in coaching salaries, facilities, recruiting, and player compensation. And they note, because right now it's a zero-sum game from their perspective, every additional dollar directed towards football and men's basketball is a dollar that is not available for any other student athlete or any other program. And so what's the consequence from their view? Olympic sports athletes could get reduced cost of attendance stipends. They're likely to get lower Alston payments. There are threats of scholarship reductions and in some cases, program elimination. Because again, their view is this is a broad problem. It says athletic departments are scrambling to fund revenue sports that keep all the other enterprises afloat. And here's a direct quote. This is the paradox. A system designed to help college athletes is, in practice, concentrating resources among a few while eroding support for many. Okay, so that's the case they have set forth. Now, we'll later talk about what their plan forward is or what their suggested path forward is, but it includes 3 components: congressional action, a governing body that can actually govern, they're talking about the NCAA, and a hard enforceable spending cap. Okay, now, here's a couple of key points that we need to consider as we are contemplating what these folks from the University of Louisville, these leaders from the University of Louisville are telling us. Certainly, a major university is an important, critical economic driver for the region. Now, depends on whether you're an in-city school, okay, or a suburban school or a college town, and what else there is around. So that's not necessarily true on the macro level, but certainly a major university is a critical economic driver for the region. If a university fails, the fallout is broad in scope. And we can think of many universities that if that sucker went down, it's a real problem for everyone that's around them. Now, I think the comment that I've heard multiple times is that it's not a revenue problem, it's an expense problem, is too simple an explanation, and it lacks nuance that these 3 authors are trying to get us to understand. That is not just let's cut spending, it's that the consequence of the athletic enterprise supports the entire ecosystem, not just for the academy, for the community in which it sits. And so you can't just deal with it on this binary flat basis. I think additional nuance, which they are arguing, is required. Now, this raises a couple questions. Who were supposed to be the primary beneficiaries of NIL to begin with? Did we ever think about this? In my mind, I saw people walking around with t-shirts with athletes' names and numbers on them, and I knew those athletes were not getting compensated for that. But and I thought they should, but there was no scenario where I predicted that this kind of spending would result from where we find ourselves. But did anyone think who the primary beneficiaries of NIL were? Because these folks are arguing that all student athletes should receive some benefit and none should receive any consequence. But that drives the second question: who in fact should benefit? Should any student athlete suffer as a consequence of another student athlete benefiting? It's a key question in this equation because what they're suggesting to us is the way that the spending is occurring, it's benefiting this few and it's squeezing everyone else. And to keep the whole thing going, you got to keep benefiting the few. But because money is not an unlimited resource, it's cramming down the others. Okay? And we also need to think about how is coaching salaries, the facilities arms race, have those things made it worse? Because we see lots of coaches getting these outrageous sums of money, including these outrageous payouts, should the university determine that their services were not adequate. And then I question whether the rev share is the straw that broke the camel's back, or was the system going to break anyway? Anyway, we're going to think about all of these items more deeply, but from a governance perspective, it's important for governing boards to understand that there's all these balls in the air and these multiple objectives that have to get achieved, and athletics is a critical component of keeping the entire thing going. Now, when athletics is draining resources in a far greater manner than it has previously, how do you navigate through that? So these are really tough challenges. We're going to talk about it more. I just wanted to table set for you with what the University of Louisville leaders had to say about it, and hopefully they were hoping to get the conversation going. We'll see what happens next. As always, let me know what you think.